When I watched Fantastic Four last weekend, I walked out feeling satisfied, for the most part. Don't get me wrong, the movie is pretty damn good. Amazing, even, by recent MCU standards. I really enjoyed watching the characters and their actors bounce off and interact with each other and illustrate that family dynamic, especially in a heavily stylized retro aesthetic world with such an amazing score. But ultimately, while it's a movie that finally gets the Fantastic Four right, as a superhero summer blockbuster, I think it was pretty underwhelming. But to get into why, I gotta talk about spoilers, so you've been warned. And with that, I think that as good as the film is, it ironically lacks action. I don't know about you, but when I watch a superhero movie, I expect them to use their powers typically in one or more combat scenarios. It shows that these guys are not supposed to be messed with, and how they're above and beyond normal human beings. Action sequences are supposed to cement the hero as super. And the fact that we don't have as many action sequences as something like, say, Thunderbolts creates a lot of smaller problems as well, especially considering the action scenes we did get weren't anything spectacular. And while the movie does a good job at establishing relationships and who these characters are to each other, it doesn't really do much to sell me on the idea that they're a bunch of crime-fighting superheroes. Sure, there's that opening recap sequence, but that's a lot of tell, don't show. First of all, I felt that Ben was underutilized. The Thing is easily the most iconic character on the team. He's practically the mascot. Well, yeah, sure, he's not Mr. Fantastic. He immediately stands out because he's the big orange obvious rock monster. And despite his fame, Ben doesn't really have much to do in this film, which is a travesty considering that the Thing is historically one of Marvel's most iconic characters, being a huge name in the 60s and 70s. When you think about it, every single character in this movie had a moment that was theirs. Johnny deciphers an entire alien language from a single phrase and successfully talk no jutsus the Silver Surfer into defecting. Reed figures out the initial and backup plan on how to beat Galactus, and Sue unlocks the 8th gate and pushes her powers to the absolute limits. But Ben doesn't really have anything like that. Sure, he's the pilot when the four are being chased by the Silver Surfer and trying to escape the black hole, but that was ultimately a team effort and not just a Ben moment. Even his clobber in time scene is a shared moment with Johnny. Most of his scenes are him just walking along the street pining for the teacher character who also gets no screen time. Another reason I felt that the Thing wasn't used much in the film is that they barely touched on a core part of his character. That despite his powers and the good that he's capable of doing with them, he misses looking like a human. It's a pretty important part of his character that he's the only one who doesn't have a choice for his powers. Reed, Sue, and Johnny can all use their powers at will, but Ben is just permanently the Thing, and that reality sucks for him. I get that the film is set a few years after they've gone into space and received their powers, and by this time, Ben has probably mostly adjusted to looking the way he does, but that feeling of wanting to go back to who he was is something that never really goes away, and outside of a single scene of him looking at a television showing how he used to be, it never really gets touched on in the film. The Thing is supposed to lament how he looks, and it's an important aspect of the Fantastic Four, because Ben's appearance is a direct consequence of Reed's hubris, and him looking the way he does effectively serves as a reminder to Reed that this might be what happens when you don't consider every variable. The fact that he turned his best friend into a rock monster and permanently altered his life weighs on Reed too. It's why he puts such an immense amount of pressure on himself to avoid failure, and it's why the scene that they share where Reed verbally beats himself up for turning Ben into the Thing ultimately felt like it could have had more weight. I mean, I guess you can say that his arc is accepting that he looks like a giant rock monster, but that he's a human being at his core, and that shouldn't prevent him from trying to live his life. So he just goes and asks the teacher lady out anyway, but that's not explicitly shown, so it feels like a bit more of a stretch. And speaking of, I think Mr. Fantastic's powers were ultimately underutilized as well. Let me start this part off by saying that the film did a very good job of showcasing that Mr. Fantastic's real power is his intelligence. Reed's mind is by far the smartest on the entire planet, potentially the universe. Yes, his body is incredibly stretchy, but it's his intelligence that allows him to beat bad guys and save the day. But like Ben's super strength and durability, Reed's stretchiness is barely utilized, and when it is, it's just so bland. Oh, he's elongating himself to scale a building, or extending his arm to write something on a chalkboard. I get that CGI is expensive, but they chose to spend it on a distractingly bad baby that almost ruined one of the most emotional scenes in the film. Reed is smart, yes, but him utilizing his powers creatively is another way of illustrating that intelligence. He can coil around people like a python and constrict their movements. He can act as a rubber band and form a slingshot with the Thing. He can enlarge certain parts of his body or even create extra body parts. Just look at how he's portrayed in Marvel Rivals. Mr. Fantastic isn't just Spaghetti Man. He's supposed to be able to be a bit of a morphling and bend his body into wacky zany shapes. I went in hoping that we'd see Reed be a bit more like Elastigirl, but instead we just got long Pedro Pascal. I think having one or two more action sequences, or even fleshing out the opening scene more instead of having it play out like a montage, would have done both Ben and Reed wonders in terms of showing us how they're superpowered individuals that have been doing this for almost half a decade, especially considering that the one major action sequence that we do get is pretty damn underwhelming. I despise that this giant planet-devouring titan acted like nothing more than an oversized toddler in the final act. I do acknowledge that he didn't really care about fighting the four and was just hyper-focused on getting Franklin, but I just think that the final battle could have been executed without making Galactus look stupid. Though I do want to praise how they made it a point to show us that they evacuated the city, especially because Paul Walter Hauser did a phenomenal job with the few scenes he's given, but that's about the only thing I thoroughly enjoyed. The entire plan to bait Galactus into stepping into the teleporter was poorly executed, and it almost failed because, oh no, he started walking in a different direction. If Johnny had just flown behind the teleporter with Franklin instead of all the way back to the Baxter building, Galactus would have been easily dealt with and Sue and the Surfer wouldn't have had to sacrifice themselves. Instead, we get a final fight scene that explicitly doesn't show how powerful the team is because it's just them getting outclassed by Galactus. And let me be clear, them getting gapped by this planet-devouring menace is 100% the right choice. They were rightfully outclassed, and they only managed to beat him because they had to sacrifice one, almost two members of the four. But the problem is that this is the only real fight scene in the movie, and it's just the heroes getting fly swatted. If I weren't already a fan of the characters, I'd walk out thinking that they kind of suck at fighting. I bought a ticket expecting to see the Fantastic Four being, you know, fantastic. I wanted to see them actually fight bad guys instead of the quick montage we had in the beginning. While the movie does a phenomenal job at establishing them as a family with strong bonds and everything, the final battle isn't a very good representation of how the four act as a team. Yes, Superman just a few weeks ago started out the same way with him being canned by Ultraman, but that's not the only fight scene in the film. Eventually, Superman is able to beat his clone, showing Clark's resilience. Heck, he even managed to do it 2v1. But this movie doesn't do the Fantastic Four justice in terms of being a crime-fighting super team. Ben's strength and invulnerability are barely utilized. Reed's stretchiness isn't explored at all creatively. Sue was shown to be the strongest member of the four, but she had to die to unlock the full strength of her powers. Johnny got a lot of love in this film, but I wanted to see more of that for everyone else. I feel that as good as the film is, it would have been so much better with a bit more action sequences thrown in between. Give Ben something or someone to punch, allow Reed to creatively use his powers, sell me on them as a super team that's worthy of being on the big screen. While I have said on this channel that superheroes are supposed to focus on saving people, and that's what they ultimately did, and that being a superhero isn't just about beating bad guys, a good superhero movie or piece of media in general is supposed to find a healthy balance between those concepts, because defeating evil fundamentally is a form of saving people. But overall though, I did like the film and I think it's a very good movie. It was genuinely fun and the first undoubtedly positive Fantastic Four film. If the only issue I have with an MCU flick is that I wanted more of it, then that's a great sign for the studio going forward. With this film and Thunderbolts before it, things are finally starting to turn for Marvel, but I'm not fully convinced yet, because after years of mediocre content, one good movie is luck, two good movies is a coincidence, and three is a trend. So all eyes are on Brand New Day next year and everything that comes after. And I'll probably be doing a video on those, so if you like this video, be sure to smash that like button, let me know your thoughts down below, and subscribe so you don't miss what I have coming up next. Consider helping out the channel as well by becoming a member, and I'll see you in the next one.